We're currently living through the biggest economic shift we've ever experienced, bigger than the COVID crisis, bigger than the dot-com bubble, heck, it's even bigger and more wide-reaching than the Great Recession in 2008. It's all about trade. You see, for decades we've been told that free trade is great and free trade is the future, that if we all work together, the world will prosper together. And that's exactly what we've experienced over the last 80 years. Countries globally joining this network of mutually beneficial trade so that everyone ultimately gets what they need. But today, that dream is being somewhat dismantled by both the left and the right. Biden, Trump, Democrats, Republicans, they're all undoing the system that has defined the modern global economy. And if it plays out, this will be the biggest economic shift we've ever lived through.
For decades, our country has been looted, pillaged, raped, and plundered by nations.
There is simply no reason why the blades for wind turbines can't be built in Pittsburgh instead of Beijing.
We're going to rebuild our country with American hands by American workers.
American tax dollars are going to be used to buy American products made in America to create American jobs.
From now on, it's going to be America first.
That's the way it's supposed to be, and it will be in this administration.
Now, we didn't always live in a world where everything was made somewhere else. Go back 80 years and the global economy looked very different. Most countries made their own goods, grew their own food, and even built policies to protect their industries from foreign competition. Tariffs were high. Imports were viewed with suspicion. Global trade existed, but it was slow, expensive, and often seen as a threat rather than an opportunity. Then came World War II, a conflict so devastating that global cooperation was no longer optional. It was necessary for survival. Now, as we know, the Allies ultimately defeated the Axis powers of Germany, Italy, and Japan. And at that point in history, the United States led an effort to build a new world order, one grounded in peace, stability, and shared prosperity. And a key part of that vision was free trade. In 1944, economists and policymakers met in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire to design a new international economic system. The US dollar became the global reserve currency, meaning that the world had a common currency to conduct trade of goods like wheat, corn, soybeans, metals, and of course, oil. Institutions like the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank were created to promote global economic stability. And over time, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, later the World Trade Organization, was born to reduce barriers between countries and open up markets. The idea was simple. If nations were economically tied together through trade, if they depended on one another for goods, for capital, for growth, they'd be less likely to go to war. That was originally the whole point behind globalization, and for decades, that theory seemed to hold. The US opened its markets and encouraged others to do the same. Europe followed, Japan followed, and eventually, so did China. In 2001, China joined the World Trade Organization and fully entered the global economy. Factories in China popped up by the thousands. Hundreds of millions of Chinese workers were pulled out of poverty. Goods became drastically cheaper for consumers in the West. And corporations, especially in the US, raked in record profits by outsourcing production to wherever labor was cheapest. It was a golden era for globalization. Trade surged, supply chains became global. Corporations could source raw materials from Africa, manufacture in Asia, and sell in North America, all seamlessly. The free market had gone global. By the 1990s, global trade was no longer just part of the economy, it was the economy, and it led to massive growth, particularly in emerging manufacturing hubs like China. But behind the scenes, cracks were forming in America. But before I talk about that, I just want to alert you guys to something. A lot of you guys ask me what websites I find my numbers and data from when I talk about various stocks in my videos, and for that, I pretty much exclusively use Seeking Alpha Premium. And right now, Seeking Alpha are having a big sale, meaning you can score an annual subscription to Seeking Alpha Premium for $60 off. If you're interested in analyzing individual companies, I would highly recommend Seeking Alpha Premium. With that subscription, you get unlimited news and analysis. You can pull up any stock and immediately get 10 years of financials, The growth and profitability tabs are really helpful to get a gauge on where the business is heading, and also check out the valuation tab. I really like this tab because it integrates with the Seeking Alpha rating system and it acts as a fail-safe. For example, if I thought Meta was a flaming hot buy based on my discounted cash flow, by checking in with Seeking Alpha, I can catch myself before I do anything silly, and I can see why the rating system disagrees. So honestly, I could talk about this all day, but it's best just to try it for yourself. So using the link in the description and the pinned comment will get you a 7-day free trial. And if you like it, as I said before, you can also get $60 off an annual premium subscription. So thanks to Seeking Alpha for sponsoring the video. Now back to talking about global trade. And as I was talking about, through this period of the 1990s and 2000s, global trade led to massive worldwide growth. But during this time, there were cracks forming in America. Many American towns saw factories close and jobs shipped overseas. Flint, Michigan, once a booming hub for General Motors and auto manufacturing, saw its population decline by over 40% as GM and its suppliers shifted production abroad. Youngstown, Ohio, a symbol of the US steel industry, declined as global steel production shifted to Asia and other cheaper producers. Burlington, North Carolina, once home to a booming textile industry, suffered as textile companies moved production to Mexico or Asia following the North American Free Trade Agreement in 1994. And Rockford, Illinois, known for precision manufacturing and machine tools, lost tens of thousands of manufacturing jobs as companies moved operations overseas from the late 1970s through the early 2000s. Jobs were lost, cities declined, inequality grew, voters grew angry. And in the background, countries like China were rising quickly. In fact, a 2016 paper by 3 economists estimated that up to 2.4 million US jobs were lost due to import competition from China between 1999 and 2011, especially in manufacturing-heavy regions. Still, the era of free trade marched on. Until now.
We're in competition with China and other countries to win the 21st century. We're at a great inflection point in history.
Foreign leaders have stolen our jobs. Foreign cheaters have ransacked our factories, and it's very unfair. We have been ripped off for decades by nearly every country on earth, and we will not let that happen any longer. We will take in trillions and trillions of dollars and create jobs like we have never seen before. April 2nd, 2025 will forever be remembered as the day American industry was reborn and the day that we began to make America wealthy again.
For decades, the logic was simple. More trade meant more growth. The freer the flow of goods, money, and ideas, the better off everyone would be. But today, that logic is being rewritten by both sides of the political spectrum. From Washington to Canberra to Brussels, countries are pulling back from globalization. Tariffs are rising, factories are coming home, governments are stepping in to control where and how goods are made. This isn't a temporary shift, it's a systematic rethink of how the global economy should work. And the most surprising part, it's being led by both Joe Biden and Donald Trump. In his first term, Donald Trump was the first US president in decades to openly challenge the free trade consensus. He slapped tariffs on hundreds of billions of dollars worth of Chinese imports, withdrew the US from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and made America first the cornerstone of his economic agenda. And after he was defeated in the 2020 election, many people thought that Joe Biden would just reverse course, but instead, he doubled down. Biden's economic agenda embraced industrial policy in a way we haven't seen since the post-war boom, through bills like the CHIPS and Science Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Biden spent hundreds of billions of dollars to bring critical industries like semiconductors, clean energy, and EVs back to American soil. This is no longer just about economics, it's about security and it's about control. Just look at semiconductors. These tiny chips power everything from smartphones to fighter jets, but the vast majority of advanced chips are made in Asia, particularly in Taiwan, a region with rising geopolitical risk. The Biden administration made it clear the US cannot rely on foreign rivals for critical technologies. So now, chip fabs are being built in Arizona, Texas, and Ohio. But it's not just about America. Other countries are doing the exact same thing. Even my home country, Australia, is investing in rare earth minerals to reduce the reliance on Chinese refining. All of this marks a clear pivot away from a single interconnected global economy and toward a world of national supply chains, regional alliances, and self-sufficiency. Even multinational companies are taking notice. Apple, for example, is shifting iPhone assembly to India and Vietnam. Tesla spreads their factories out into different regions, not concentrating production in any one country. Corporations are no longer optimizing just for cost, they're optimizing for resilience. This deglobalization is really about reducing vulnerability. The COVID crisis really exposed just how fragile the system had become. One virus in one country and suddenly shelves were empty around the world. That had a big impact because it made everyone realize just how dependent we are on other countries, particularly China. This is why you now see Donald Trump continuing with the same plan that Joe Biden was implementing just a year ago, trying to bring manufacturing back to America. These wide-reaching tariffs are not just trying to make more money, they're another economic tool to get manufacturing to shift back to America. America's push for deglobalization really boils down to four major forces that have all converged at once. The first is national security. COVID and the war in Ukraine exposed just how vulnerable global supply chains really are and how dependent we all are on other countries. Over 60% of the world's semiconductors and 90% of advanced chips come out of Taiwan. And when we talk about rare earth elements, China produces about 70% of the world's supply, but controls about 90% of the refining. That's a precariously dependent situation the US finds itself in, and that's not good for national security. Then the second reason behind the shift is jobs protection. While globalization created, enormous wealth, the trade-off was that it also hollowed out manufacturing towns across the West. As I mentioned earlier, millions of American jobs have been lost to Asian manufacturing, and that trend is similar in other countries too. After a while, voters started to push back, and now reshoring jobs has become a rare point of bipartisan agreement. Then from there, climate change is another key driver. Governments are pushing to build green industries like EVs and solar panels, but they don't want to rely on high emission countries for those technologies, and they want to make sure they're developing the local skills and resources needed to sustain them. And then finally, there's the resurgence of geopolitical rivalry. Trust between major powers is eroding, and trade is shifting from being a tool of efficiency to one of strategic leverage. With tensions escalating, particularly between the US and China, there's a growing urgency for the US to rebuild key industries at home, reducing its exposure to potential export restrictions from adversaries. So there are some really big drivers of deglobalization. And while I personally see myself more as a globalist, and idealistically I believe in a collaborative world of free trade agreements, well, I have to admit there still could be some genuine upsides to this shift. Countries are gaining more control over critical supply chains, which is better for everyone if something major like COVID or a Russia-Ukraine conflict breaks out. Jobs that were once offshored are now likely to slowly return to regions that have been economically stagnant for decades. Supply chains are now being rebuilt for resilience as opposed to being purely optimized for cost. And in some cases, this shift could even support climate goals, pushing governments to build greener industries locally rather than relying on carbon-intensive imports. But for all the pros, there are also a list of cons. Consumers are likely to face higher prices as cheap imports are replaced by more expensive domestically produced goods. Corporations, especially those built around low-cost global supply chains, could see margins shrink, which, beyond being bad for American retirement accounts, can also lead to layoffs. And most importantly, as countries become more inward-focused and global cooperation breaks down, the world risks becoming more divided, more unpredictable, and more competitive. Trade has long been a force for peace. There's no doubt intertwining countries economically and making everyone reliant on everyone else means it's really hard to cut ties and declare war. So there is the possibility that when that declines, global tension rises. So while it might just seem like Donald Trump is tooting his horn and renegotiating trade deals, there really is a much bigger underlying shift taking place. And if it keeps trending as it is, this really will be the biggest economic shift of most of our lives, because what's changing today isn't short-term volatility or interest rates, it's the fundamental rules of the global economy that we've been building on for the past 80 years. So where do things go from here? Let me know down in the comments section below. And before I sign off, another reminder to check out Seeking Alpha's massive sale. Get an annual subscription to Premium for $60 off, or just try it for 7 days for free. Check out the links down below to score that discount. But apart from that, I'll see you guys in the next video.